Jamie Weinstein on the line with us. He's the senior editor with the Daily Caller. It's simply dailycaller.com is the website. Hey, Jamie, how you doing?
Good, Tom. How are you?
Thank you. I'm very well. Thank you for joining us once again. It's nice to have you back on the program. So Adam Carolla did this little riff where he said rich people are better than poor people. Nobody is, to the best of my knowledge, sure at this point, maybe you are, whether he was being facetious or whether he was being serious. Do you know?
Well, I mean, obviously he is a comedian, but that's one of the things that you can do when you're a political comedian. You can say some things are just jokes and whatnot. Actually, Michael Moore does a lot of that. But I think he was probably being a little bit serious. I actually think he's wrong on this point. I think some of the points he makes are usually pretty good. But on this point, I don't think if he thought about it a little longer, maybe he'd come to a different conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, the poorest fifth of America's households contribute 4.3% of their incomes to charity. The richest fifth give less than 2.1%. The poorest two-fifths of Americans' households work far more hours than anybody in the top one-fifth. I mean, it's basically the working poor in America are working their butts off. We don't have a people aren't working hard enough problem in this country. Our poverty problem is we have a people aren't paid enough problem.
Well, that's not where I would point to where he was wrong. Of course, you can look to, he's an atheist, but look to all the religious missionaries who aren't particularly wealthy but do good works all around the world, often, in poverty themselves. So I don't think you measure their worth by the dollars in their bank account.
I'm not trying to, and if you want to get into that, I think we need to start acknowledging.
That was a critique of Carolla, not you.
Oh, okay. I think along with that, we need to start acknowledging the work, the wealth, the value of stay-at-home moms or dads who are not recognized by Social Security when they retire, and are not recognized by our tax code every year, and all those other things. And there's so much that we don't do in this country to encourage people to simply be good citizens and do things that, basically we incentivize anything that makes money, and that's it.
Well, I think his point was he was speaking personally of him growing up in a less than affluent background, a very poor background, and a lot of his friends when he was growing up who didn't necessarily achieve what he achieved, he viewed as slackers in many ways. They didn't take work seriously, and from his experience that the people that he knows now who have succeeded, he finds have values, cultural values or values of work that have propelled them to where they are.
Yeah. See, I've found that when I hang around with people who are worth millions and billions, and I'm guessing you and I have both done so. I'm not, I'm very, very aware of the fact that a significant fraction of them simply inherited what they have. Whereas when I hang around with people, who are where my father was, the bottom end of the middle class. He raised 4 boys in a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. That's what I grew up in, and he worked at a union shop, and it was decent. I never thought that we were poor. I thought we were the middle class. I didn't realize we were the low end of the middle class. And what I see when I look around those neighborhoods in Lansing, Michigan, where I grew up, where everybody worked in the auto industry, is people working their asses off to this day.
Well, I mean, I think the point that he missed is something that you just mentioned, is that your father, he instilled good values in you, and all those things. There are, obviously plenty of people who are not super well off that are good people and have a lot of values you can learn from. I do think he has a point in the sense that, in the left today, Tom, and I know you're going to disagree with this, this 1% is often demonized, but they obviously have contributed much of value, and there's probably much we all can learn from them and how they rose to the top, often from the bottom. So,
to get into the 1%, you only have to have an income of $320,000 a year. My guess is most people who have an income of $320,000 a year are probably the high end of professionals. They're people who spent 15 years in medical school, or whatever. I mean, they're people who actually can point in some way, when you get past things like white privilege and everything else, can point to an accomplishment, and not, along the way, lucky breaks and things like that, but things that got them there. But when we start talking about the 1/100th of 1%, the people who
even then, Tom, I think that you probably can learn a lot from them, and they probably have, in many cases, not all, I'm sure, but in many cases, a lot to learn from.
Well, I know a few of those people. I know a couple of billionaires who are Silicon Valley billionaires. In fact, just got an email from one last night, and in fact, I had a long talk with this guy. We were up in Vermont together a few months ago, and he said it's not that I was smarter or worked harder than anybody else. It was that our idea was in the right place at the right time, and he was one of the 3 founders of a company whose name you would immediately recognize. But I don't want to out the guy for the purposes of this conversation. But, there's this group called Patriotic Millionaires. I had one of them on my TV show last night, and they just
a lot of them, I've met them too, and a lot of them, I don't think there's anything wrong with this, but you seem to be focused on it. A lot of them have also inherited their money.
That's the nature. This is what Thomas Piketty, or however you say his name, Piketty, pointed out in his book Capital, is that yes, there are the occasional Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, but it's
not the occasional. I think that's not particularly fair. Many people in this country have come to the top through hard work, and in fact, a lot of people at the top through a generation of 2 are once again at the bottom. So I don't necessarily buy this idea that there's just very few. You can find
social mobility, Jamie.
Work their way up.
You know this as well as I do. Social mobility in the United States, among the 34 OECD countries, the most highly developed industrialized countries in the world, among the 34 OECD countries, in 1980, when Ronald Reagan came into office, we were number 1 or number 2, and we are now number 27. We are at the bottom.
You're making it sound like there's 6 people, Steve Jobs among them at the time, who have been able to work their way up, and everyone else.
Steve Jobs engaged in criminal conspiracies with the heads of other Silicon Valley companies to suppress the wages of his own engineers.
I don't know about the criminal conspiracies, but he has.
It was an absolute criminal conspircy. Some of these guys are getting busted for it. He's dead.
Why was he thrown in jail? I don't know.
Because it just came to light a few months ago.
I'm not going to trample on Steve Jobs' grave. He obviously had some downsides. People who, if you read his biography, wasn't maybe the nicest person.
No, the guy who was the real inventor was Wozniak, not Jobs. Jobs was a good designer. He had a good aesthetic sense. And he was a good businessman.
There is plenty of people in the 1% that there's many values that they've had that help to propel them to the top.
But my point is that we should not have an economic system that says, okay, cool, you worked hard, you got to the top, or you inherited money like the Koch brothers did, and you turned it into something massively larger, or like Donald Trump inherited a couple $100 million from your dad, now you're a billionaire. Therefore, we're going to give you all this special treatment in the tax code. You're never going to have to pay more than a top 20% income tax rate because you can turn everything into a capital gain, for example. I think that's crazy. I think, if anything, what we should be saying to those folks, you are benefiting more from the commons of this country than anybody else. You're going to pay a higher tax rate. The guy who's busting his butt over, working at 7-Eleven or whatever, he's going to pay a lower tax code, and he's going to get something more out of this country.
Well, I obviously disagree with you on a lot of your economic policy. I am for tax reform. I imagine we'd probably differ over what tax reform would look like.
I suspect.
We just have different visions of what the American economic system is and what it should be like.
Yeah. Someday, unfortunately, these conversations, 9 minutes is never enough. I would love to have you on for a longer conversation, or at least another conversation about, why defend the interests of billionaires if you're not a billionaire? I don't get it. But, Jamie, I appreciate the conversation, and the Daily Caller is a great publication. DailyCaller.com, Senior Editor Jamie Weinstein. Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks, Tom.